This
My only
conference will now be recorded.
my only problem is I've got a shit ton of supplies and no laser.
Yeah,
Are you
I've
doing
got a bunch
acrylic?
of lasers and no supplies.
What was that,
Hey
Steve?
Jim, are you buying acrylic too, or have you done any of that?
Yeah, I got. This week I ordered over $2,000 in supplies between ply, JDS stuff, and I only got like 3 sheets of acrylic though.
Well, I just found out the other day that we have a thing in Arkansas called Mr. Plastic, and we got one like an hour away from me, and it's no minimums. They'll cut it for you, so they'll deliver, or you can pick it up. And I think the price is like 450 a foot. Is that high? You think?
I would literally have to see what I paid per
Okay.
square foot. Like I said, I bought 3 inches of 3/16 just because it was available, and other things are becoming unavailable or getting hard to get.
We have a Piedmont Plastics,
Yeah,
and
we have one of those in Memphis too.
they've been real good to work with.
I get all my stuff on Amazon. I need to look at some other places, but I don't make that much stuff in enough volume to try to look for those kinds of discounts. I just usually need my stuff fast. So,
Well, Piedmont is about 20 minutes away from me, and they've been over backwards.
mhm.
Um, they have a deal over there where if I'll call them and say, look, give me some of your offcuts or whatever, they'll sell me like they sold me like $50 worth of stuff. It was a good variety to learn to practice with.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
That's what I figured. A large percentage of what I just ordered is probably going to be garbage because that's what I'll be learning off of, which sort of sucks.
So, yeah. Sorry, I was looking at a ticket real quick. I was trying to watch the ticket system. I don't really have any new news. I know we talked about the Rotoboss going metal, and that's good. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. They switched relays. This is just random stuff. I don't know if I talked about that. They went to these. These are SMC, I think, as opposed to those other ones that didn't look quite as good. So it looks like they're improving some of their components as they're moving along. So I try to keep track of that stuff because the wiring, the connectors are a little different and that kind of thing. So, but nothing out of the ordinary. Everything's running smooth. So on this end. So, and if anybody has any questions, like I say, feel free to jump in. So, Steve, I figured we could do your setup right here. You could share your screen, and we could set y'all up and get you cutting.
I watched your video on that hour with where you did Angela, whatever it was. I watched
Hmm.
you on that, and I set it up from that video, so I'm pretty well set up.
I,
Um,
I've got a second video that I did, and I recorded it because they wanted me to, and I still have to edit it because there's a lot of places where it shows up some emails and some other proprietary information. So I'm
mhm.
gonna have to redact it and edit it a little bit, but I'm gonna put it online, and it's not like the original normal everyday thing that I, you know, kind of have gotten accustomed to doing. It was, answering some specific questions on some things, and it was some real good stuff. So I'll publish that and then make it, I'll put it in the social media too.
Yeah,
So
I followed that video.
yeah, somebody's got a lot of feedback. And I guess we're still waiting on some fiber lasers to hit the soil, and then we'll make an announcement about that. But hopefully they're coming soon. So
Actually, doing a live setup on one of these Thursday things might actually be a good idea for
Yeah.
people.
After I've said that, after, it does sound like a good idea, and I'll have to figure out exactly how to do the camera angle from where they're at, to make sure that that is going to be conducive to that kind of thing, and do a remote in there. But yeah, without having to do a bunch of crazy stuff and use OBS and that kind of thing. But I think that would be a super thing to do.
I was gonna say I'd volunteer, sort of, maybe, but because mine will be here like in June. But the thing is, camera wise, all I would have is a cell phone, but I do have a tripod and that. But
Yeah.
it would take some teaching from you to teach me how to get it live,
Right.
video wise.
Yeah, we'd have to work out a few of those details, but yeah, we could do a dry run even if somebody wanted. And even the way Steve's got it, even if you can't zoom into every little thing that's happening, a bird's eye view, kind of an overview would be perfect. And then you can always go to the documentation and stuff to get the details. But I think that would, be a real cool thing to do. So I'm gonna make a note of that.
Yeah, just if you want to, just like I said, mine's be here in a few weeks. That would give you some lead time. You and I could work on it.
Right, right. Let me make sure I got your email address. I think it shows up here.
I Well, for some reason when I logged in this time, it asked for my name and email address again, and I didn't put my email address in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't see it. Just shoot me an email if you're interested in doing that, and we'll work out the details.
Yeah, I could help you with it. Be the test guinea pig dummy. I'm
All right, that'll be
sort of
cool. We'll
new
have
to.
to start promoting that too
Oh
early,
God.
so everybody.
Yeah, I'm sort of shy to the camera. That's why I generally just sit here and don't say nothing.
I got you. Yeah, that's why
But
my overview doesn't stay on very long. I try to pan to other monitors and stuff pretty quick. Nobody wants to see my face anyway. So
I just figure if it'll help somebody, I'll
yeah,
be willing to help somebody. I mean, I just had a guy in my shop. He wanted me to rip down some cherry and stuff, and he's wanting to finish it on his own just because it's what he wanted to do. And I was trying to instruct him on how to finish and sand between coats and break edges and stuff. And he says, "What are you for teaching?" I'm like, "Dude," I said, "I just enjoy this part of it."
yeah, sure. But yeah, if you want to, I think that would be spectacular.
Yeah, like I said, all I've got is just a cell phone, but like I said, I do have a tripod and
Hmm.
thing for it and everything for doing pictures, so I could set up a still, without having a camera bouncing around all over the place.
Sure, absolutely. Yep, that'll be awesome. Good stuff. Um, I see a few more people popped in. If you guys have any questions, feel free to jump in anytime.
I guess I'll start off then.
Okay.
When you're setting your laser up, I watch the videos and it shows filling the water level up to normal. All right, once you turn the laser on and stuff, it drops down to about middle ways of the normal. Do you go
Mhm.
back in and add more water to the normal, top of the normal, or just leave it alone?
If it's at least halfway,
Yes.
in between the range, I usually leave it. If it's lower than that, I might top it off a little bit,
Okay.
But you check it every month or so anyway. So, if it got critically low, you would know it or it would alarm. So,
Right.
and stop the function. But yeah. You got any more? You said you had a few maybe.
Well, I was talking about the Roberts Art Library, and
Oh
then
yeah.
I'm going to go in and watch your video of adding Corel Draw to Laser Burn. I'm going to watch that tonight and
Okay.
go do a micro on that.
Yeah. Now I added an Excel. I added a file at the bottom, an XML file, I think, on that article now, and it's the color palette, and you can import that color palette into Corel Draw, and it's the actual Lightburn color palette. So that
Okay.
way you can work from the same colors in Corel if that just feels good
Is
to you.
that your video or the House of Laser video? Because
That's the article that I've got on it.
okay.
Did he do one on installing that macro? If
I think
if he did, I'll put it on that page with ours. I'll
let's
look real
see.
quick.
It may have been Lightburn's trying to add it on. It may have been Lightburn.
Let me see if I can screen of monitor 2. Okay, so yeah, I didn't do a video, but here's this article that I have on it, and I'll look for the video and add it on this page. I didn't know there was one.
Maybe I looked at something different then.
Okay. No, if there is, I'll do a quick search, and if I can find some more, I'll do it. Or probably ought to do one on this if not. But here's the XML file for the color palette, and you can import that right into it. So, and then there's that PDF, but you can also find it in the help menu of Lightburn itself. But I just added it here just in case.
All right.
Which is just the PDF documentation on how to do it. So maybe if I get a minute, I'll try to do a video on this, because I have had a question or two about it. But all the steps are right there. So, and you want me to link that so you can get it in the chat? I probably should, since we're gonna. Oh yeah, that's one thing I wanted to say when we were recording. And thanks for the idea. Is we're gonna send the link out for these webinars. We're not only going to upload them to YouTube, but I'm going to put a link in that YouTube description where you can go and get all of the resources, the screenshots and the links and the chats and all of that stuff, even the transcripts. So we'll make those available. So anyway, that'll be a cool thing too. Anybody else got anything?
I had a couple of questions about the rotary.
Okay.
I recently just figured out how to use it and been playing around with some mugs and stuff. And my mugs, I'm doing just a single side, a single graphic on it, and it's coming out great. Mm-hmm. But I haven't set up the steps for rotation yet, so I can do one all the way around or do one on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen the video that Robert's got out, and I understand the idea behind it. I'm curious, does that have to be done on on each item of a different size? If I have a 30-ounce tumbler, I have one setting and a 20-ounce.
Yeah, Jason may be able to answer that better. I honestly have not tried to do a 360 wrap and have the registration right and all that stuff, on a cup ever. So I really don't know.
Yeah, if you're doing, like, say you set it up on a 20 ounce, you do a template for a 20 ounce, you do a template for 30, you do a template for 15, whatever the cup is you're using, you have to make a template for each one of those so to work for each one of those. It's not universally the same, because obviously the objects are bigger. But once you figure out and get that template set up, all it is a matter of just plug and play what you want in those areas, and then put it in and hit engrave.
So setting up the templates to each product is.
Well, if you set your rotary up to a 20 ounce cup or mug or whatever it is, typically when you do that, if you dial it in to the T, then if you go up to 30 or down to a 15 or 11 or whatever the other smaller ones are, you're gonna see you'll see a flux of about 1 millimeter or so either way, bigger or smaller depending on the object. But typically it's not enough to where it's not something that's visually noticeable necessarily to like your customer, because you're already engraving around an object, which makes any design kind of look out of place to speak of. But so that little millimeter here and there, bigger or smaller, is not going to really make that big of a difference. Now, if you set up your machine with a 30 ounce and you go all the way down to a 15 ounce or whatever the mugs are and such, then yeah, you're going to see a huge difference. That's why I usually tell people to do the 20 ounce, because it's in the middle of everything that's made pretty much. And then that way, if you go one way or the other, you're only off by a hair either way. And it's not something that people are going to harp on or probably even notice.
Hey, I will say, and it just happened recently, I don't know if it was the update from Lightburn, but I'm actually doing some wine glasses right now. And what I've noticed here recently, it used to be that I had it dialed in like what Jason was saying. My steps were 4250. It worked with everything. But now I don't know if something's changed, but literally I have to dial in my steps, and all I do is a 1 inch by a 3 inch rectangle, and I lay a piece of tape down that's that size, and I say, all right, 1 inch by 3 inch. I know what it's supposed to be, but if I use the same steps for each one, it's not been working like that for me recently, Jason, within the last month. And so what I've actually took time to do today is I had to set up the steps. For example, I've got anywhere from 2,622 steps for a 30 ounce or 32 ounce water ones that JDS has. If I put a 20 ounce tumbler in there, I'm at 4,500 steps. If not, man, it's doing some crazy stuff.
No,
So I don't, go ahead.
are you putting different size, like those numbers that I referenced are basically tumblers?
Correct.
Now,
What
if you're doing wine glasses, the water jugs, things like that, where the neck or the part that rolls on the wheels is smaller than the body you're engraving, your steps are not going to be anywhere near what they should be because you have a smaller object.
Yeah.
You're rolling on a smaller object, but you're engraving on a bigger portion of that object. So you have to usually go down in your steps to make up for that difference. But yeah, the I don't know if that's what you're doing or not, but the whole one number thing is based on just tumblers and mugs.
Yeah.
Where they all have a uniform size at the neck of it.
Yeah, that water, like you were saying, that water bottle that they have, I don't have one here right now in front of me, but you're right, it is very narrow at the top. But all I'm doing, it's just one of those, it takes some little time on the front end of it, but I just go and I dial in. I'm like, all right, this is a 20 ounce, this is a 30 ounce, this is the diameter of at the area that it needs to be at. And I don't think about it. It's maybe some extra steps, and I hope that it's proven to me to be redundant. But I'm just finding here recently, I got to change those numbers. It used to be, like you said, I had it for the 30 ounce, and whenever I put a 20 ounce in there, it was fine. But it doesn't seem to be working like that. And maybe you can find something that I'm doing incorrectly here, but that's just what I'm doing. And it's some extra steps, Gene, like I think that's what you're asking about. But it's some extra steps, but I just do it on the front side. I'll do it with all of my first ones, especially here recently, and just be done with it.
The ideal thing would be to have numbers for everything that you do.
Yeah.
That way there's no question about it. You put it in there, you do it. The way that the rotary is set up, it's set up with a 1-to-1 drive ratio for that reason, to try to allow one central number to account for a variety of things instead of having to dial in each individual one.
Let me ask you a question, Jason. Changing the object diameter to what that is, isn't that where that calculation matters that would allow the steps to stay the same if you measure the diameter of the point where the drive wheels are touching? Because one revolution is one revolution.
Yeah, but the way it was set up is it works more like a chuck than it does a rotary because of the ratio that there is. Because typically a rotary will have a small pulley on the bigger pulley for the drives and stuff, and they've worked in the industry. I guess they've worked that out to where it's pretty standard across all the different rotaries, which we've only had really one or two for up until about a couple years ago when we all started making these type of rotaries. So it was pretty easy for them to make something that fit into that box per se. When I do my rotary, or if I show anybody how to do this, I tell them to leave the object at 88.5 or whatever the base number is and don't touch it. Because if you do that, you are changing the formula inside Lightburn, and if it's off, which it probably is because of the fact that the way I geared it is different than the way most people gear the rotaries, then that's where you'll start having problems. So usually when I tell people to set it up, I tell them to go to machine settings and then go to scroll down to the rotary and just use those two numbers, your diameter and the rotary diameter and the
How much of that
Whatever.
is cumulative error just from the distance that it's traveling, and it's off a little bit, but the farther you travel, the farther off it gets. Kind of like a watch being out of time. You don't
Yeah.
notice it after a minute or an hour, but you might after a day. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Since you're going all the way around the cup, I would
Yeah.
think that might be a factor as well.
Yeah, because if you look at it, right, it's geometry. You're taking a circle and turning it into a linear interpretation, right? So you're turning the object to move a certain distance around a curve, right? So the Lightburn calculates that with the variables you put in, right? Jason, to your point, right, is if the calculation is based on a constant and you change that constant, right, then it's going to affect the formula versus you want to have your constants the same and change your variable.
Yeah, and it's basically what I'm getting at with that is the fact that I've changed kind of the way it was set up. The way I designed it and set it up is to not touch anything. Don't change the object ever. Just leave it based on the stock numbers that Lightburn gives you, and that's it. Not to say that you can't do it the way it's normally done, but you just have to take into account that wasn't the way it was set up, and that's kind of how I outlined it in the instructions. I haven't seen if Thunder kind of uses that same kind of principle or not.
I just copied your instructions.
Oh, okay.
So,
so yeah, so maybe I need to make it more clear in there on how that was done. But that's how, when I set it up and designed it, that's what it was designed around, just using the baseline numbers from Lightburn, and all you change is the diameter of the wheel and the diameter of the cup.
Yeah.
Is there a
not the diameter of the cup, I'm sorry, the steps per rotation. Those are the only two things you change.
Well, the good thing is everybody seems to have a solution to get by whatever they're trying to output, however you get there, as long as you get there. And Robert joined too, so that's perfect, because we were talking about that. That's his video, I think, kind of spawned this conversation anyway about doing the full wrap or the registration on a cup. So
it is his fault.
How you doing, Robert?
Good. How you doing, guys?
Good. Did you catch the beginning of that? We were talking about the rotary and steps per rotation, and it started about your video about how to register a cup, and do a full wrap and have everything line up and be registered. So that's kind of what we've been tossing around.
I caught the kind of the tail end of it.
Yeah. So he could probably just ask you directly, because he could re-ask the question, see if you had a take on it, since everybody else has kind of discussed it a little bit.
Yeah, basically I was asking about the steps per rotation. Does it have to be changed for each item that you put in a rotary? I mean, you'd put in the circumference of the item in the rotary settings, but I wasn't sure if you had to change the steps per rotation, or if Lightburn would automatically calculate steps per rotation based on the circumference of the item.
You know what I've found, and like Jason and everybody else says, there's about 15 different ways to do this. But what I've found is, as long as the diameter of what you're putting on the drive wheels of the rotary is the same diameter as what you're engraving, you shouldn't ever have to change your steps once you have it dialed in. The trick becomes where, like a sports bottle, you have a 2 3/4 inch neck that you might be putting on the drive wheel of the rotary and a 4-inch diameter engraving surface. That's when you can't use the same steps, or your spacing is going to be all screwed up. So typically, once you get your steps dialed in, whether it's a 20-ounce tumbler or a 30-ounce tumbler, as long as that diameter that you're putting on that drive wheel is the same as what you're engraving, you never change your steps. It's only when you have a different diameter what's going on the drive wheels compared to what you're actually engraving.
What do you mean by compared to what you're engraving when you say that?
Well, so like a sports bottle, like this one right here.
Yeah, that's what I just did.
Got a smaller neck on it than the engraving surface.
Okay.
And so if you put this on the rotary and actually put the neck on the drive wheel, now a lot of people will spin this around backwards so they don't have to figure that calculation. And in that particular case, you don't have to worry about changing your steps because this section is on your drive wheels and it's the same diameter as what you're engraving. Where it gets tricky is if you put something smaller or a different ratio that's on the drive wheel compared to what you're engraving is where it gets all hosed up.
Okay.
Typically, what I'd do is, like I said, set it up as 20 and something like that. I think my steps are like 4,400 or somewhere around there. But for something like that, I usually what I do is I just cut it in half at 22, and it works just fine.
Find a
But
happy medium.
as the neck gets smaller, you basically just you reduce your steps to make up for the same difference on the larger portion of the bottle. But that's kind of how I figure it. Like if I do a bottle like that and I take my 44, I'm like, okay, well, let's do 22, and usually that works pretty well. I mean, again, you might have a deviation of a millimeter or 2 or 3, but in the grand scheme of things, if you're just doing like a one-off thing real quick, someone's probably not going to notice it. But if you're doing like a long run of something, I would definitely I do it myself. I have a cup that I tape and I do a light engraving on to verify how it looks. So I go through all that, and then I run the batch. That way you know it's set up right, it's done, you don't have to worry about it. Whereas just a one-off thing, I'm not so concerned about it because that little deviation, they don't have anything to compare it to,
Right.
and 2, it's so small of a change in that regards that they're not even going to notice it visually anyways. So
Yeah, that's right. And the other big thing is if you're doing just, small artwork, you'll never see that. Compared to a full wrap, you've got to kind of have it dialed in.
Yeah.
I mean, my normal steps for anything is like 40-90. And then if I do something like this with a wrap, it's like 31-10.
yeah.
So if you don't have to worry about doing a wrap, your accuracy doesn't have to be nearly what it would be
Yeah.
as if you're trying to match up patterns and that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
because that's what we were
Yeah.
talking about was the the collective error. The farther you go, the more off things can get. Same way with moving in that direction, that axis. But yeah, that's neat stuff. I need to play with this more.
Another thing I want to put out just for anybody that's listening that might be doing it or someone that may listen later, but when you're setting up the rotary, make sure that if people are asking you about it and they're setting up the rotary, I lost my train of thought. Sorry, I had a call come through. What was I just talking about?
Green beans.
Green beans.
Free upgrades to the metal parts instead of 3D printed for all previous customers, I think.
Right. That just threw me off.
The reason I say, and Brian, you might know, with my machine, it's not old by any means, but it is 4 years old now, and there's changes. And I know one of them is like when Jason sent the rotary out to me, we found out that my machine, for whatever reason, I've got my rotary in there backwards.
Mhm.
We tried flipping wires and everything else. So I'm wondering if there's something else that Lightburn might be affecting a certain age machine compared to the newer one.
I don't think there's been any changes that would have been visible within this time frame. They haven't changed the structure of their rotary function, I don't think, in forever and ever, because Rueda hasn't changed their structure in forever and ever. They're coming out with a 4-axis, which we're already doing that. That's what makes ours different. That's why we've got that custom firmware in there, so that we can use the U channel. But yeah, previous to 2018, 2019, I forgot exactly when the cut was. They used to be 5-pin with the switch, with the on-off switch, and those use the Y-axis. And all the ones that have the 7-pin XLR with no switch, they all use the U channel or the A-axis. So there are some differences there, but nothing that's popped up in the last couple of months or even the last year that would have been, indicative of any kind of issue that I've seen anyway that's been reported.
And
Okay.
it goes back to the point that Jason mentioned, right? Is if you set it up in a mid range, right, you're not going to see enough error because that 4,400 steps per rotation is you're effectively taking the circumference of that circle and dividing it into 4,400 pieces. So if you're off by 10 of them, you won't notice that, right? That's not noticeable to the eye because that's the amount of steps that that motor is outputting to turn it that much. You won't see it, right? So if you're like Jason said and Robert had said, if you're only doing a small design on one side of it, you're not wrapping it, and you're doing a one-off, you won't see it. I'll throw cups in mine quite often. I don't touch anything. Right?
Yeah.
I use the last setting, and it looks good enough, right? I'm not running out huge batches of stuff. If I'm going to do a few, of the same thing, I might dial it in, or if depending on how big or how much of it you're engraving, but a small emblem or a little saying or some artwork, I don't touch the settings because it looks fine. I don't notice any issues with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember
And that's
what I was
just
going
on
to talk
tumblers.
about. So I remember what I was going to talk about now. I had to write it down so I didn't forget. All right. No, so I've had several people, mainly Thunder because it's the bulk of the rotaries right now, but a lot of people are getting a hold of me asking why, when they're doing their setup, why it's not lining up. Like they'll do a square or a rectangle or whatever, and they do it and it's not lining up. Well, come to find out they're doing lines instead of engraving, which is it's meant to engrave, not necessarily do lines. If you're going to do lines, I tell them you have to back down your settings so it does not transition so quickly, because that's going to cause it to slip. It can be done, but that is something that you would have to slow down the U-axis on your jerk settings and your acceleration settings. You'd have to slow them down so when it makes that quick transition through maybe shooting down the cup, coming to a stop, making a turn, and coming back, all those steps can throw off where that cup is in relation to the overall design or the square or whatever. So it just, when they're doing that, I always tell people to engrave it, because that's what you really do with a cup on a rotary, is engrave it. You don't do lines very often. So when you're setting it up, make sure you do it that way. And it's kind of hard to explain to people how that works, because they're like, well, it's a rectangle. If it's out when I'm doing lines, it's going to be out when you're engraving. And you got to kind of help them understand that you're engraving in a linear path, whereas, or not linear, but everything's linear. Whereas if you're doing an outline, it's not linear. It's changing directions as it goes around. And chances are, if it walks a little bit, you're definitely going to see where those 2 points don't line up exactly the same when they come back. But if you slow down your steps not your steps, but you slow down your speed on your U-axis, it'll help prevent that, to where you can actually do an engraving and come back and do an outline, and it'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people just jump straight to doing lines, probably because it's quicker. That's the quickest way to do it. But if you're trying to do lines and make it line up, and you're doing it fast, it's probably not going to work that well. But if you're doing
Slings
lines,
around.
if you're just doing the lines to get your two side points, to get your radius around the cup right, then it's probably going to be 90% of the time it's going to be accurate. But when they come back together and they don't line up, people can't be surprised when that happens, because it's, unless you slow down your machine. I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed, instead of doing lines, so even if you want the look of a line, right, you don't want a full engraving or something filled, is take whatever your vector is, your line, and offset it ever so slightly in or out, and just fill the line, so it makes the line a little bit thicker, but it still gives you the line profile.
Well, if you're doing a line art, in Corel, I don't know about Lightburn or anything, but in Corel you can actually adjust the thickness of your line.
Yeah, so adjust your line weight.
Yeah,
Well,
Lightburn
yes,
Lightburn doesn't have stroke. It just pays attention to the vectors.
Yep.
Yep.
So, if you do it in Corel, if you make the line bigger in Corel and you go to vector it, it's only going to see that main line, the center line. So what you have to do is when you make your vector, if you want to enlarge your borders or your edges to look more like an outline, then what you do is you go in there, you create your thickness that you like, and then you'll go up into objects, and then you'll go down to where it says convert objects to path, or let me see what it says here.
Convert the lines to a path.
Let's see. Convert outline to object. So what that does is it takes that thin line that thicker line is based off of, and now makes that thin line the thick line. So when you
And
convert it over to Lightburn and engrave it, it'll actually engrave that thick line. Because if you don't do that, it's still going to just engrave that hairline line because it only sees the vector portion. But when you change it to the object, it actually turns that object into the actual vector. That makes sense?
I needed that last week. Man, why you got to be a week late?
Yeah, because if you don't convert your object to path, or your what I say it was,
Yeah.
the object or convert outline to object, it's only going to do the outline. It won't do the actual thickness of that line. So yeah, there's ways around doing that without actually having to line it, like Jeremy was saying. But that's the easiest way that I know of, at least in Corel. Lightburn, I don't think
it's
it
easy in
does that.
Lightburn. You can do offsets in both directions even, and then just erase the original.
Yeah.
If you want to do
so
something
it'll do an inner and outer trace, and then you just delete the central line. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I haven't messed with it in Lightburn. I just deal with Corel because everything I do is based off of that. But
Cool. If anybody else has any questions, like I said, feel free to jump in.
Did I see that you recorded this?
Yes, I did. I see it. The little red tally light is blinking.
Two
I still
minutes
haven't
early.
found the one I didn't find the one on YouTube from a few weeks ago. I'm still looking for it.
Which one is that?
The one you didn't record?
Yeah, that one.
Oh, that one?
The,
I don't know
the
what
good
you're
one.
talking about. I'm never going to live that down. That's okay. So.
Well, I got a couple more questions if nobody else has anything right now.
Nay, go for it, man.
This morning I'm working on cutting thicker materials and some signs that I'm working on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that on my engraving, it was set originally to 500 and I think it was 55, and it gave me a really nice deep engraving.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, well, I don't really need it that deep, so I sped it up a little bit to about 700. But the time when I hit the preview, the time in the preview was exactly the same as 500. It was like there was a limit on how fast it could go. It couldn't go over 500, and no matter what I put in over 500, it wouldn't register and give me a faster burn time. Is that normal? What's
well, let me pull it up. I'll show you here. Let's see. I'm going to keep monitoring.
You're going to open a whole can of worms there, Gene.
No, it's easy.
Go down a rabbit hole here.
So if you go over into additional settings, it's in device settings. Go over into additional settings, and you can, my controller's not on, but you need to read from controller, and you'll notice this maximum speed will change to 1,000. And a couple other the values will change. And what this is doing is reading all the information from the controller to set up the simulation timings correctly. So what that means is most lasers can only achieve a maximum of about 500 millimeters per second, whereas we can go to 1,000. I've had mine up to 1,100, 1,200. And so we need to account for that in the settings so the simulation timing will be correct, because it caps at 500. It can't think any higher than that. So I think that's why you're getting the same time. So you can connect to your machine, click the read from controller button under additional settings, under device settings and hit OK, and it should improve the preview and make it more accurate.
And then a couple of other things along with that, right? You have acceleration and deceleration. The faster you go, the more time you're going to spend accelerating and decelerating as well, right? Because you have to speed up that fast and stop, right? So the longer or the wider your engrave is, the more benefit you'll have. If you have an inch wide design at 1,000 millimeters a second, you're not going to see much difference. But if you have a 30-inch wide design, you'll see more of it because you get to use the max speed longer. So if you think about like driving a car, right, you stomp the gas and then you got to hit the brakes at the other end. But if you're only going 20 feet, you don't benefit from your top speed much.
What was that on the post? 35 miles an hour in a parking lot, right?
Yep. Yeah. Someone put that in the post the other day, right?
You can go 100 miles an hour. You can go 35, which is more efficient.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, right, is finding the right that right speed setting that's best for your job. Because the other thing is even when you go to your preview and you've read it from your controller and you look at, they're not always spot on, right? So if you go look at the actual time and compare it, right, you might find that, hey, it was 5% faster, right, but it wasn't 20% faster.
I was just looking to see if I could get another minute or two out of it, and it didn't go anywhere. And I was wondering what the deal was on that. I figured it looked like a limit set somewhere. I wasn't sure.
Well, I think Jeremy's on the right track. I think your artwork is not long enough for it to be able to achieve anything higher than 500 millimeters per second. It can't go that fast because it's gonna hit the wall and turn around before it can ever go fast enough to do it.
These were only like 8 inches wide. These are little small ones.
Yeah, you're not even.
You could turn the layer settings on and try fill each shape individually, and that'll eliminate some white space. But if the design is too small, then your machine's gonna be jerking around all crazy because it's gonna be changing directions and having a lot of rapid moves. So that's generally on more spaced out work, but you could try it. The benefit may not, be there, but you could simulate it and see what happens.
Yeah, the other thing I've noticed on speeding things up is the orientation of your design, right? So something, if you had, let's say something very tall but not so wide, if you rotate it by 90 degrees to where the majority of your work's being done on the y-axis versus the x-axis, you can almost double the speed on the same thing. If it doesn't matter for what you're engraving. So if you were going to engrave a rectangle solid, right? If you take the longer or the larger dimension and spread it across the y-axis, right? The y-axis is way faster than your x-axis, right? So especially when you're engraving, right? So it can run up and down the rail rather than move the rail. You can get a lot more speed out of it that way rather than anything I've seen in the settings.
I found that out by accident on my Chinese machine when I was working with it. And I went and started looking and found a video on Lightburn that explained that.
Yeah, because if you look at the motion components, right, running the head up and down the gantry is a lot easier to accelerate and decelerate than it was if you were trying to swing the entire gantry back and forth, right? So, that the movement on your x-axis, right, is going to be limited by the mass. Versus your y-axis. So I try to lay out my designs wherever possible to put the majority of it across the y-axis and the longer bit, you can get the benefits of the speed.
Well, we're talking about motion right now. This is something I'm curious about. Now, of course, just saying, okay, this is a sign I just completed. Now, the gantry was moving this way, and it was doing the burn. But if you look at these lines, the lines they look vertical. They look like they're individually carved lines.
What's your substrate there?
I don't know if you can see.
That looks like the wood grain. What is it carved into?
I think he hit right between layers. I think
looks like that's the growth ring.
Yeah, that's the grain of the wood.
Yeah, that's the
Oh, is
layer
that what
underneath
that
the
is?
one you burn into, and it's rotated 90 degrees. The grain
Yeah.
is.
Oh, that could be. I don't know what kind of wood this is. It's pink wood. It's really pretty wood. I
There
can't
you
remember
go.
what they called it, but it's that was a mass that's still on it. But yeah, I guess
Yeah,
that would make sense.
you'll notice that a lot more if you're cutting like actual hardwood. And go engraving a piece of walnut, and you can see it'll be at angles, or you'll have wider gaps where the grain was a little bit different. And sometimes it's pretty, and sometimes it affects your design, especially when you start getting into like multicolored, right,
Or-
where you got some darker and lighter grain in your wood, where like heartwood and sapwood mix. It'll affect your outcome.
Or just avoid oak and pine and spruce
Yeah,
and all that
anything that's
stuff.
real porous, right?
Yeah.
That stuff will leave ridges in it like you wouldn't believe. And also, if you can mitigate that a little bit, kind of how you did it there, is where you went across the grain. Because if you go with the grain and you hit in those pockets, you'll actually create really deep, really deep voids in the softer
Yeah.
woods of that
Yeah,
stuff. Whereas
gouges effectively.
if you cross
That
grain,
explains.
if you cross grain
That
it, at
explains
least
the one I
the
did this
beam's
morning.
only hitting it for a fraction of time versus the whole way across the piece. So it won't be as noticeable if you go cross grain on that kind of material. But I avoid that stuff at all costs.
Yeah, the woods that are
makes
real
me-
good there are your hardwoods that are tighter grain. So like walnut, maple, cherry's actually really good.
Cherry's
It has
phenomenal.
a very pretty. Alder's another one that's not quite
Poplar.
as hard, but it's got a very pretty burn and not as much of the grain. Poplar's another good one.
Poplar's good. Now, if you get the top or the high grade pine or spruce from like Lowe's or Home Depot, the one that doesn't have a bunch of those real wide bands in it, you can actually do pretty decent engravings with those as well. But when you see the cheaper stuff that most people go for that have them real dark caramel colored rings in them, those are the ones that are the worst, because every time you hit a ring and you hit the soft spot's going to dissipate faster than the ring, and then you're going to be left with these big old valleys and stuff in them that don't look very good at all.
Yeah, and right now, fortunately, hardwood is just as economical as spruce, pine, and fir construction lumber. So so get used to paying that price, and you can get used to using the nicer material.
So everybody's going to start engraving OSB because it's probably the cheapest stuff out there, even though it's $30-$40 a sheet.
You know what, Jason? My neighbor's building a house here, and he just started decking a roof. He was paying $41 a sheet for OSB. I can get 4x8 sheets of Baltic birch plywood in 1/2 inch, proper 9-ply Baltic birch in 4x8 sheets for $40 at my local hardwood supplier.
I'd have a
So,
birch house if that was the case.
I'm about to instead of doing sheetrock downstairs in my shop, I'm actually accumulating my birch plywood for the walls.
That's ridiculous.
It is.
All right.
Another thing, there's a lot of pretty exotic lumbers that comes out of South America that's really nice for lasering. When you can start getting Purple Heart and Red Heart and Paduke, and they're a bit more expensive, but if you're doing smaller projects, they're quite nice.
I hope you have deep pockets if you're going to be going for that stuff. Because around here, just a piece of probably 1 inch by 4 inch by 12 inches is about $40 for Purple Heart around here.
I love the way it cuts. The edge is so dark, and you can
it's
almost see a
pretty.
reflection in it.
Oh, it's beautiful wood. That's probably the best wood I've ever used in anything that I've ever done. And then they got the Kona wood.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff's hard as nails. But when it engraves, it's almost like bamboo. How you have like those little circular air pockets that show up when you engrave that Kona wood, and it's kind of the same texture, but it looks so good as long as you're not doing like anything detailed. But again, that stuff is ridiculously expensive, and you'll ruin any kind of equipment trying to cut it.
I found this place and other people have used it and they like it. I get all my hardwoods. My dad's a woodworker, so luckily I get all the stuff I need for that kind of thing. Let me see which one it's on. Let me drag it over in the right window here. Some of you might have used this already, but I'll put the link.
Cooch. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I'll put the link to that in the chat just in case.
It's really good about Ocooch is their pin blanks are 50 cents regardless of the species.
Nice.
Huh.
Yeah.
There's a sample pack too.
Another thing, if you can get Western red cedar,
Yep.
that stuff engraves really nice.
Yes, it does. It's pretty.
Not the cedar that, like at the top of the screen where you first came in, that cedar, just regular cedar, the red cedar. That stuff engraves okay, but you got to watch out for the white spots. If you get one with a lot of white spots in it, you'll have some undesired effects.
I got
and
miles.
basswood's pretty as well on the laser.
Yep.
Yeah, it is.
Alder, I think alder's probably the best looking wood to engrave, in my opinion, because it just takes a burn so well. It's nice and crisp. It's clean. It's consistent.
It's clean. You don't have to clean it, and it's beautiful. The edges, they don't burn. They just
not real
tan, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And for those of you.
Yeah, for on the alder, right? That's what Epilogue sends out their little Aztec calendar in. Is thin alder, right? You can buy it from Ocooch there.
We can do ours on birch on 3-ply.
Yeah. We're gonna do ours on Purple Heart.
Right.
No, but for those of you that have seen those, and the burn on it is beautiful. Another place that's got some wood or another ways to look at it if it fits into your project is Brazilian hardwoods for decking, right? So I know there's a place in Atlanta called Brazilian Hardwood Depot that sells your Brazilian teak, your Brazilian walnut, your Brazilian oak, which is Ipe, Masaranduba, and Kumaru, or what they call them, but they're very hardwoods, very tight grain that are used for like outdoor decking. Real pretty, and you can get some nice burns on those too. But yeah, don't use any traditional tools on them. They will dull up saw blades and drill bits. They're actually denser than concrete.
Yeah.
But good stuff for outdoor projects because they're UV resistant, rot resistant, and they last forever. I think they sell a 75-year warranty on their wood products.
If you can get some, if you like the pine kind of look, if you can get a hold of some cypress, some good old growth cypress, that stuff engraves really well, and it still has the kind of the look of like a pine or spruce or fir or something like that with the color of it and everything.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? I actually have a session that I'm going to do, not an emergency session, but one that I want to get knocked out pretty quick right at 4. So I might knock off a minute or two early. But I want to see if anybody else has anything else.
Brian, I did send you the email to your Brian email. Just make sure you got it.
Let's see. Some of that stuff's been going to spam. Let me make sure.
It was from my Outlook account instead of my business one.
Good answer, Brian.
That's what I'd say.
Don't see it. It may take a minute. It's got to go through Zoho Mail before my Google account pulls it, so it may be just a minute. But I can find you. I've got your info. I can pull you up in HubSpot. So I'll shoot you an email if I don't get yours here in a little bit, and we'll get that worked out.
Okay,
that'd be super. Maybe I can get you a hat or something for your trouble. we'll get you some swag. That's what I ought to do is give away a hat on every episode. I see Cheyenne on there and Grant. They might not like that idea so much. That might make them a little bit busy.
What was that?
Gotta get them doing something.
What?
Yeah.
Cheyenne just disappeared.
Yeah, I was wondering if we should give out a hat or some swag at every session, just for random. I'll just call it out, I said that
Yeah,
would make
we
you
just got to
guys
get some
pretty
more
busy.
in.
Probably wouldn't want to have to deal with too much of that. I might get you in trouble.
No, I don't mind. We just got to get more hats in. We're out right now.
Yeah, we need everything.
A
Everything's
good
just
idea.
going out as fast as it comes in.
Speaking of being out and getting some in, you getting any fiber lasers in soon, Grant?
I
Good
don't know
question.
what their lead time is, to be honest. I know they put them on a container, but they're not on our like inventory sheet, so I can't track it. I could ask.
It wasn't on
I
the
don't
Ever
know.
Given, was it?
What'd you say? I'm sorry.
So it wasn't on the Ever Given, was it? That one that's sat in the Swiss now.
No, Lord, I hope not.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I'll ask for an update and we'll see.
Yeah, but there are some coming across then. So I wasn't sure if they were still held up testing or being
No,
released. I know they got the FDA approval, but I wasn't sure if
Yeah.
that was the last straw.
From what I understand, they're pushing them out the door, or ready to push them out the door. Already, like Grant said, we've got a container. I don't know if it's in the water or not, but yeah, they usually don't. They wait until they're pretty sure before they launch something. Unlike some other places that I know, like a copier company in general, they'll put out a box that's not ready and then fix it all with firmware, or think they will.
Hopefully it's on the water, not in the water.
On
Yeah.
the water, right? Yeah, I guess that
It
could make a
depends.
difference.
Well, I guess not.
I don't know.
If
They're
it's
pretty tough, man.
All that crazy stuff that's going on overseas right now, God only knows.
Little WD-40 and it'll work right out. That'll displace the water. Just spray it right in the power supplies. No, don't listen to that part. I'm gonna
Not official technical advice.
I'm gonna turn off the recording before